They called it Harley's masterpiece. But beneath the chrome, the Twin Cam 88 was a ticking time bomb that shattered trust, bank accounts, and entire communities. But here's the twist. This story doesn't end with Harley. Stick around, because the fallout could reach your garage too. The gamble. This wasn't evolution, it was desperation in chrome. At the end of the 1990s, Harley-Davidson stood at a crossroads. The Evo engine, which had carried the company through the turbulent 80s, had earned a reputation for reliability and endurance. Riders trusted it, collectors praised it, and mechanics swore by its straightforward design. But inside Harley's boardrooms, there was mounting pressure to deliver more horsepower, more torque, and above all, a new image that could compete with Japanese manufacturers that were flooding the American market. The result was the Twin Cam 88, unveiled in 1999 with much fanfare. On paper, it was bold and innovative. Instead of the single camshaft setup that had defined its predecessors, the new engine boasted 2 camshafts. It promised smoother power delivery, more efficient breathing, and a future-ready design that Harley insisted would carry the brand into the new millennium. Advertisements declared it the next great leap, and dealerships displayed it like a crown jewel. Yet beneath the shiny exterior, the rush to market had left scars. Engineers had been under enormous pressure to innovate quickly. In their haste, they approved compromises that would later prove disastrous. Oil circulation, cam support, and material choices were all areas where shortcuts whispered danger. The gamble was clear. If it worked, Harley would secure its dominance. If it failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. And as the miles piled on, owners would soon discover that the gamble was not paying off. What riders discovered inside the engine wasn't innovation. It was a time bomb waiting to detonate. The weak link. Imagine your engine grinding itself to death while you ride. That was the brutal reality many Twin Cam 88 owners faced. At the center of the disaster was a single component, the cam chain tensioner shoe. This small piece of plastic was supposed to keep the timing chain in check, ensuring the 2 camshafts stayed aligned. But in practice, it became the weak link that doomed the entire engine. The design flaw was cruel in its simplicity. As the miles added up, the plastic shoes wore down rapidly. Friction chewed away at them until they disintegrated, scattering fragments into the engine's oil system. Those bits of debris coursed through bearings and gears, causing damage far beyond the tensioner itself. And the worst part? There was almost no warning. Riders could be cruising confidently one moment and face catastrophic engine failure the next. One rider recalled cruising at highway speed when the cam tensioner failed without warning. The engine seized, leaving them stranded on the shoulder as traffic roared past. By the time the bike was towed and inspected, the damage was so severe that the repair bill rivaled the cost of a used motorcycle. Harley mechanics quickly recognized the problem. Some advised owners to replace the tensioner shoes at regular intervals, often around 20,000 miles, just to stay ahead of disaster. But even proactive maintenance was no guarantee. Once the plastic started shedding, the damage was already underway. What was marketed as an advancement turned into an expensive liability, and riders began calling the engine a ticking time bomb. Trust in Harley's engineering began to erode, and resentment grew. Loyalists had forgiven quirks in the past, but this was different. This was betrayal embedded in the very design. While tensioners shredded themselves in silence, another flaw screamed loudly in pools of oil. If this breakdown of Harley's hidden flaws shocks you even a little, hit that like button so more riders see the truth. And drop a comment below. Were you one of the owners burned by the Twin Cam 88, or do you know someone who was? The leaking truth. It didn't just mark its territory, it hemorrhaged it. Oil leaks became one of the most visible and humiliating flaws of the Twin Cam 88. While small leaks had long been joked about as part of Harley's personality, these were not charming drips. They were gushing signs of deeper problems that could not be ignored. The rocker box gaskets and base gaskets were the most frequent offenders. Poor sealing and heat expansion meant oil seeped out relentlessly. Some engines left puddles on garage floors, others sprayed mist across boots and frames, and when leaks combined with the engine's chronic overheating, the consequences worsened. Cylinder heads warped under stress and gaskets failed faster than they could be replaced. Riders who prided themselves on maintaining their bikes meticulously were still left with oil-stained clothes and constant repair bills. The irony was painful. Harley had marketed the twin cam as the end of the old leaky stereotype, promising a modern, clean-running engine. Instead, it doubled down on the very problem it was supposed to eliminate. For many, the leaks became more than a maintenance headache. They became a symbol of betrayal, a reminder that the promises of reliability were little more than marketing gloss. By the early 2000s, the frustration was impossible to hide. Internet forums lit up with angry riders sharing photos of oil-soaked bikes, and mechanics admitted the design simply could not keep up with real-world riding conditions. Owners thought repairs would end the misery, but the bills kept climbing like a ransom note they could never pay. When Harley's design failed, riders turned to the aftermarket for answers. We've listed trusted gear and fixes riders swear by. Check out the links in the description. The costly lifeline. They told you to maintain it, but maintenance became a ransom. The official line was simple. Keep up with your service schedule and the Twin Cam 88 would reward you with years of loyal riding. In reality, the service schedule was less a lifeline and more a shakedown. Riders found themselves caught in a cycle of endless replacements, rebuilds, and hidden costs that never seemed to end. The cam chain tensioner alone demanded attention every 20,000 miles, turning preventive maintenance into a major financial burden. Many riders opted for aftermarket fixes, such as hydraulic upgrades or gear drive conversions, but those solutions came at steep prices. Combine that with the recurring gasket replacements, warped head repairs, and occasional crankshaft issues, and ownership costs ballooned beyond expectations. Even loyal Harley enthusiasts began to question whether the brand was taking care of them or simply cashing in on their devotion. The cruel reality was that this was not just normal wear and tear. These were structural flaws designed into the engine from the start. No amount of oil changes or careful riding could undo the weaknesses baked into the design. For many, the twin cam became less about freedom on the open road and more about constant negotiation with their mechanic. In garages and dealerships across the country, frustration gave way to disillusionment. The engine that was supposed to carry Harley into the future was now dragging its reputation backward. That cycle of endless fixes set the stage for a louder backlash than Harley had ever faced from its own community. From rumor to revolt. One forum post became a movement Harley couldn't control. At first, the problems with the twin Cam 88 spread quietly, almost like gossip whispered between riders in garages and at roadside diners. Someone's cam chain tensioner had exploded at 20,000 miles. Another's gasket failed twice in the same year. Mechanics started to notice patterns in their service bays. The same bikes, the same issues, and the same frustrated owners walking in with hope and leaving with bills. Word of mouth gave those early complaints power. In the age of the internet, what might have once been isolated incidents became amplified across message boards and motorcycle clubs. Online communities became archives of horror stories, with riders posting photographs of oil-soaked boots and destroyed tensioner shoes. Every failure was dissected, every repair bill discussed, and every voice added fuel to a growing fire. Independent shops, which relied on Harley's reputation to keep customers loyal, found themselves dragged into the uproar. Some began openly admitting that the Twin Cam 88 was a liability. A few even posted technical breakdowns showing how the flaws were baked into the design. For Harley, the brand that prided itself on loyalty and tradition, this revolt felt like betrayal. But for riders who had invested thousands of dollars in their machines, betrayal had already come from the factory. Instead of answers, Harley responded with polished silence that deepened the anger. Corporate denial. Harley's biggest flaw wasn't mechanical, it was silence. For years, the company tried to downplay the complaints, framing them as rare occurrences or blaming them on poor maintenance. Official statements leaned on the language of tradition, reassuring customers that Harley stood by its engineering while refusing to acknowledge the scale of the problems. That strategy may have worked in the past, but in the era of online forums and viral outrage, denial only fueled suspicion. Warranty disputes became common battlefields. Owners who expected support were met with resistance, told their failures were the result of neglect or modifications. Some riders reported spending months locked in arguments with dealerships, only to be denied coverage for repairs that stemmed directly from design flaws. Each denial widened the gap between Harley and the very community that had sustained it for decades. The public relations spin turned anger into resentment. Instead of transparency, riders received polished marketing campaigns boasting about heritage and freedom. Instead of apologies, they got brochures for new models. And while corporate leaders doubled down on their refusal to admit fault, more horror stories spread. What might have been managed with honesty snowballed into a full-scale trust crisis. Behind that silence, engineers were already sneaking new engines onto the market, hoping no one would connect the dots. The silent replacement. Harley didn't confess, they quietly buried the evidence. By the mid-2000s, the company introduced the Twin Cam 88B, a version fitted with balance shafts aimed at reducing vibration. Soon after came the Twin Cam 96 and eventually the Milwaukee 8. Each new release was framed as innovation, as proof of Harley's forward march into the future. But for seasoned riders and mechanics, the truth was obvious. These were patchwork fixes to problems the company refused to name aloud. The cam chain tensioner was eventually replaced with a hydraulic version, a band-aid sold as progress. Displacement was increased to mask underlying issues with power delivery. Heat management was touted as improved, though the real improvements came from desperate redesigns to prevent warped heads and leaking gaskets. Each so-called breakthrough was less about ambition and more about damage control. Yet the most telling sign wasn't the engineering, it was the silence. Never once did Harley admit that the Twin Cam 88 had been fundamentally flawed. No apology tours, no public accountability, just a gradual phasing out, as if erasing the past could rewrite it. To corporate leaders, this was a strategy of survival. To loyal riders, it felt like an insult. By the time the replacements arrived, the damage wasn't in the machines anymore. It was in the hearts of the riders. Loyalty lost. What broke wasn't just engines, it was faith. For generations, Harley-Davidson had built more than motorcycles. It had built an identity. Owning a Harley meant belonging to a tribe, a culture of independence, toughness, and tradition. But when the Twin Cam 88 betrayed riders, that identity cracked. Loyal customers who had defended the brand through every downturn suddenly found themselves questioning whether Harley still stood for them at all. Stories poured out from collectors who had sunk fortunes into restoring bikes only to watch values plummet. Longtime riders admitted they no longer recommended Harley to their friends. Some who had grown up in families where Harleys were passed down like heirlooms swore they would be the last in their line to own one. For them, the pain was personal, like losing a family member to neglect. The aura of indestructibility, once Harley's greatest strength, collapsed. It wasn't just that the engines leaked or failed, it was that the company's refusal to acknowledge those failures shattered the bond of trust. What had been a proud roar on the open road now sounded hollow, a reminder of promises unkept. That broken trust didn't just stay with riders, it spread into the dealerships and workshops that lived off the brand. Dealerships in decline. When an engine dies, so does an ecosystem. The collapse of the Twin Cam 88 did not just hurt Harley's reputation, it tore through the fragile web of businesses that surrounded it. Small shops that had built their livelihoods on custom builds and tune-ups suddenly found the ground shifting beneath them. Independent tuners who specialized in squeezing extra power from the Twin Cam platform now faced dwindling demand. Their skills, once prized, were treated as obsolete overnight. One shop reported losing more than half its loyal customers in just 2 seasons. Riders who had trusted them for years stopped showing up after repeated failures left them disillusioned. The shop floor, once buzzing with rebuilds and upgrades, grew silent. a casualty not of poor service, but of a flawed engine design they could not defend. Aftermarket businesses were no better off. Shelves once stocked with cam tensioner kits, gaskets, and rebuild parts turned into warehouses of unsellable inventory. Each box represented not just wasted capital but lost opportunity. Some distributors admitted they had invested tens of thousands of dollars in twin cam components only to watch orders vanish. What had been a thriving pipeline of parts, service, and upgrades was cut off by the simple reality that riders no longer trusted the engine at its core. The pain rippled outward. Local economies that leaned on Harley dealerships suffered. Mechanics were laid off, shop owners downsized, and family-run operations closed their doors. The twin cam was more than an engine. It was the backbone of a whole economic ecosystem, and when it failed, it pulled countless others down with it. While shops shuttered, another manufacturer sharpened its blade and prepared to steal Harley's crown. Indian's window. While Harley stumbled, Indian raced ahead. For decades, Indian Motorcycle had lived in Harley's shadow, a historic name with a checkered past, always struggling to reclaim its former glory. But when the twin cam 88 debacle left riders angry and uncertain, Indian stepped forward with a machine that seemed designed for the moment. The Indian FTR 750 arrived not as a relic of the past, but as a weapon of the future. The FTR was built with racing in mind, carrying modern engineering, advanced fuel mapping, and precise geometry. Unlike Harley's flawed twin cam, it did not suffer from oil leaks or failing tensioners. It was lean, sharp, and reliable. Everything disillusioned Harley riders were yearning for. Younger riders who had grown up online and read the horror stories about the twin cam gravitated toward Indian because it represented a clean break. No baggage, no excuses, just a bike that worked. Indian's marketing team capitalized on the shift. They presented the FTR as both a tribute to tradition and a leap into the future. For riders burned by Harley, the choice felt obvious. Harley's aura of dominance, built over decades, was eroding, and Indian was perfectly positioned to capture the riders who no longer felt protected by the bar and shield. Indian's rise was impressive, but the rulebook itself was becoming the ultimate weapon against Harley's legacy. Politics of racing. Engines don't just lose to rivals, they lose to rulebooks. While Harley and Indian fought for dominance in the marketplace, regulators and race officials quietly shaped the battlefield. Technical committees began tightening rules that increasingly favored modern designs. Engines like the twin cam 88, which had been engineered around outdated assumptions, found themselves boxed out by regulations written with newer platforms in mind. Noise restrictions, emission standards, and homologation requirements became the silent killers of older engines. What seemed like small technical adjustments, an updated airflow requirement here, a stricter fuel mapping rule there, stacked the deck against aging platforms. Harley's refusal to modernize quickly left the twin cam gasping under the weight of bureaucracy. Industry politics played a heavy hand. Sponsors, manufacturers, and promoters wanted the image of motorsports to reflect progress. A bike dripping oil onto the track did not fit the future they wanted to sell. Committees spoke the language of fairness and safety, but behind the closed doors of meetings, it was about aligning the sport with global narratives of modernization. Engines that failed to symbolize that vision were quietly squeezed out. Those shifting rules carried a lesson far beyond racing. Tradition alone cannot survive in the age of disruption. Lesson for legacy brands. Tradition is heavy, and in modern markets, weight kills. The downfall of the twin cam 88 was not just about Harley or even about motorcycles. It became a parable for how quickly legacy can be stripped of value when innovation falters. For years, Harley had leaned on nostalgia and cultural identity, convinced that brand loyalty could shield it from disruption. But when flaws piled up, that weight became an anchor. The pattern is familiar across industries. Coal plants, once unshakable, are giving way to solar fields. Taxi empires collapsed under the rise of ride-sharing apps. Newspapers that dominated for centuries were dismantled by digital feeds in less than a decade. Harley's struggle with the twin cam echoed that same truth. The market no longer rewards tradition for its own sake. It rewards adaptability. The twin cam, once hailed as the engine of the future, was transformed into a metaphor for obsolescence. Its story spread beyond motorcycle culture, whispered in boardrooms as an example of what happens when a brand fails to face its flaws. For executives, the lesson was blunt: innovate or be erased. For consumers, it was a reminder that loyalty means little if the product cannot endure. That lesson didn't stay in boardrooms. It quickly shaped the way everyday buyers approach their next purchase. Consumers demanding honesty. Once fooled, riders became detectives. The scandal surrounding the twin Cam 88 changed not just Harley-Davidson, but the very behavior of motorcycle buyers. For decades, customers had trusted the brand's word. If Harley said an engine was reliable, most people believed it. After the truth about tensioners, leaks, and expensive rebuilds spread, that blind faith vanished. Buyers began demanding transparency. They wanted to see recall histories, service records, and evidence of long-term reliability before handing over their money. Warranties, once viewed as a formality, became central to purchase decisions. If a manufacturer refused to stand behind its machines, customers were quick to walk away. Even styling and brand heritage, once the strongest selling points in the motorcycle world, started taking a backseat to reliability reports and maintenance costs. This shift was bigger than Harley. The twin cam fiasco created a generation of skeptical buyers across the industry. Online research became routine. Forums, once niche hangouts, turned into consumer watchdogs. Buyers compared notes, dissected every weakness, and shared advice on what to avoid. The days of glossy brochures and dealership charm were over. Riders wanted proof, not promises. As riders sharpened their scrutiny, investors began measuring Harley not in horsepower, but in risk. The personal warning. If your job, savings, or passion rests on tradition, this should terrify you. The fall of the twin cam 88 was more than a motorcycle story. It was a mirror held up to every industry where nostalgia and legacy are treated as shields against change. Harley's downfall revealed a truth that resonates far beyond garages and racetracks. Nothing beloved is safe if it fails to adapt. For workers, it means that loyalty to a legacy brand is no guarantee of stability. Shops built around Harley engines collapsed overnight when the twin cam was discredited. For collectors, it means that investments in cherished machines can evaporate when the market loses faith. And for ordinary consumers, it means that the companies you trust most may already be one flawed product away from collapse. The warning is clear. What happened to Harley can happen anywhere. The car you drive, the phone you use, the company you work for, any of them can fall victim to the same forces of failure, denial, and obsolescence. Tradition feels safe, but in a world driven by change, it can become the very thing that drags you under. So the question is not whether Harley survived the twin cam scandal, it's who will be next. And if history is any guide, the answer may arrive sooner than you think. The collapse of Harley's twin cam 88 wasn't just about a flawed engine, it was about how quickly trust, money, and legacy can disappear. If this breakdown gave you a new perspective, smash that like button so more riders uncover the truth. Share this with a friend who still believes tradition is always safe. Drop your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We read every one. And most importantly, subscribe right now, because the next legend to fall might already be in your driveway and you cannot afford to miss that warning.